Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining me today. We're going to dive into the world of real estate commissions, exploring the traditional structures we're all familiar with, as well as some alternative approaches that are gaining traction. We'll also look at how these different models affect both buyers and sellers in the market. I'm excited to share this in-depth overview with you and shed some light on what really goes into these commission practices. Let's get started. Real estate commissions are the payments agents receive for their work in property transactions. Usually, there are two main players involved: the seller's agent, often called the listing agent, who represents the seller, and the buyer's agent, who represents the buyer. Commissions are typically calculated as a percentage of the final sale price and then split between these two agents. The purpose of these commissions is to fairly compensate agents for the valuable services they provide, including marketing the property, negotiating terms, and guiding the transaction smoothly from start to finish. Essentially, these fees reward the agents for their efforts in helping both parties reach a successful deal. In traditional real estate transactions, it's common practice for the seller to pay the commissions for both their own agent and the buyer's agent. This is typically done as part of the closing costs when the sale is finalized. The total commission is usually split between the two agents, often evenly, although this can vary. Sellers agree to this arrangement right from the start when they sign the listing agreement, so the buyer's agent's commission becomes an indirect cost to the seller. Ultimately, this commission is accounted for within the seller's closing costs, which is something sellers should be aware of when entering the market. Let's talk about why seller-paid buyer-agent commissions have become the standard practice in many markets. First, there's a historical background to this tradition that goes back decades. Essentially, paying buyer agents from the seller side encourages these agents to actively show and promote properties. Without this incentive, buyer agents might be less motivated to prioritize certain listings. Next, this practice really supports competition among buyer agents. Because the buyer doesn't have to pay up front, agents can focus on finding the best properties for their clients without worrying about immediate payment. It creates a more dynamic environment where agents compete to deliver value. This competition ultimately benefits buyers. The commission structure pushes agents to work harder and be more diligent in helping buyers find the right property, which raises the overall quality of service in the market. Finally, this approach has become a widespread custom that makes it easier for buyers to access properties and for agents to cooperate smoothly. It helps keep everything flowing efficiently, benefiting everyone involved in the transaction. When we look at the economic and legal implications, the first thing to note is the economic impact on sellers. Commissions directly reduce the amount sellers take home from the sale, so it's important for them to factor this into their financial planning. On the legal side, disclosure requirements are in place to make sure both buyers and sellers clearly understand how commissions are structured and applied. These rules can vary depending on the jurisdiction, but generally, commissions are negotiable as long as transparency standards are maintained. This means sellers and agents must be upfront about commission details to comply with the law. Finally, sellers need to carefully consider these commission costs when setting their property's price and finalizing contract terms, ensuring they don't inadvertently reduce their net gain more than expected. When we look at the impact on sellers and buyers, there are a few important things to keep in mind. First, sellers have to pay commission fees, which can be a significant portion of the sale price. This directly affects their net revenue, so they often consider these fees carefully when setting their prices. On the other hand, buyers benefit from having an agent represent them, usually without any direct cost. This representation gives buyers access to a wider range of market opportunities. Now, this setup also changes the balance of negotiation power. Sellers take the commissions into account, which can influence how they price their property and negotiate offers. Meanwhile, buyers' agents have their own incentives, which can subtly affect how offers are presented and ultimately impact the final deal. Understanding these dynamics helps clarify how both sides navigate the transaction. There are several alternatives to the traditional seller-paid buyer-agent fees that are worth considering. One option is for buyers to pay their agents directly, which can be done through commission flat fees or even hourly rates. This approach gives buyers more control over how they compensate their agents. Another approach involves buyer-paid commissions, which can create greater transparency by clearly linking the cost to the services provided. Additionally, commission splits themselves can be negotiated, allowing both buyers and sellers to customize how much is paid and to whom, rather than sticking to standard arrangements. Overall, flexible payment structures offer a way to tailor agent compensation to better fit the unique needs of each transaction. When we look at alternatives, one of the biggest benefits is that sellers can often reduce their closing costs, which means more money stays in their pocket after the sale. That potential increase in net proceeds can be a strong incentive to consider different approaches. However, there are some drawbacks to keep in mind. Buyers might be hesitant to pay costs directly, and they might also face fewer choices when it comes to selecting an agent. Additionally, alternative payment methods can sometimes decrease an agent's motivation, which can impact the quality of representation the buyer receives. Ultimately, both sellers and buyers need to carefully balance the potential savings against the possible effects on how the transaction unfolds and the level of agent involvement. When selling a property, the first thing I recommend is to carefully assess local market customs and the typical practices of agents in the area. Understanding these norms helps you make informed decisions about commission structures. Next, it's important to negotiate flexible options whenever possible. This can be especially advantageous in high value or competitive markets, where tailored agreements can lead to better outcomes. Finally, consulting with real estate professionals is crucial. They can provide valuable insights into the implications of different commission arrangements and help you choose options that best align with your financial goals and the current market conditions. To wrap up, let's focus on the main takeaways. First, seller-paid buyer agent commissions continue to be the dominant practice, largely because market incentives and competition support this tradition. However, there are alternatives to these traditional commissions that can help sellers reduce their costs. It's important to recognize, though, that these alternatives can introduce complexities, especially when it comes to the relationship between buyers and their agents. Sellers need to stay vigilant by monitoring evolving trends and changes in commission structures to make well-informed decisions. Ultimately, any decision should strike a balance, taking into account market norms, legal requirements, and the broader economic impact. This balanced approach will help ensure the best outcomes for all parties involved.